Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Coming up to midday here, have a look at the studio clock, a couple of minutes to go. We would take a look at Big Ben, but of course the hands are gone. Look, Mum, no hands. It's a wonder our two guests managed to arrive here in the studio on time. But Laura Kunsberg has managed it too, using that Mickey Mouse watch I gave her for her birthday. Prime Minister's Questions is imminent.
Don't even wear it anymore, Andrew.
I know
Sorry.
that. You've got $2,000. A statement you were about to tell me on the NHS just as we were coming on.
Yes, and we will have Prime Minister's Questions first, of course, and I think it'll be very political, local elections tomorrow, so I think you can expect Jeremy Corbyn really to go very hard.
And get some sound bites for his social media.
Absolutely, and possibly on a variety of issues. But PMQs will be followed immediately by a statement from the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, which I expect to be extremely serious and maybe very significant.
Do we know the substance?
We're not completely, nothing is confirmed. But we've been hearing that it is around concerns that many, many women, potentially many thousands and thousands of women, have had some kind of problem with breast cancer screening, which, of course, would be a matter of huge public concern. Now, I don't want to be definitive about any of this. This has not been confirmed, but it does sound like this will be a very
So it's not
story.
Coming forward to say, and I can announce 10 billion more pounds for the. It's another potential government major problem.
It sounds that way, and potentially another story, another issue that will cause very significant concerns to many members of the public who they will hear it. But as I say, this is not confirmed. Let's wait and see exactly what he says. But it certainly seems to be in very big order as something that would be a very big problem for the NHS.
And the Secretary of State for Health will follow immediately on from Prime Minister's Questions.
That's my understanding. And of course, John Barcwood normally runs Prime Minister's Questions on very, very late indeed. So it may well be not actually almost to the end of the programme that we can give our viewers clarity about exactly what is happening.
One would hope that he'll know about this, so he may have an incentive this time to get on to an issue which many women will, they'll want to hear about this. Deeply concerning.
And of course, during, after the main exchanges of Prime Minister's Questions, of course, we will continue to be trying to find out exactly what's happening. So as soon as we've got clarity, we'll, of course, be bringing that to people. And
it comes at a time, the most important thing is obviously the substance. But the politics are at least interesting too. It comes at a time when the government couldn't be weaker.
Well, it's a very, very trying time, no question, how quickly things turn. At the beginning of this session, we were saying, goodness me, after the strikes on Syria and everything that's happened with Russia, Theresa May suddenly seems to be growing in strength once more. But we have huge tensions in the Tory party over the current state of the Brexit negotiations, in particular over customs, which I'm sure you've already discussed. And
we have indeed.
The Minister saying today that those on the max fact side seem to be winning the argument, and I would suggest that's rather extraordinary to have a government minister talking openly about here's the battle inside the cabinet, but that's where the Tory party is right now.
Mr. Rapp has said this.
Absolutely, they have to openly acknowledge that there is a battle royal going on privately. You've got the European Union looking at Britain's proposals and saying, well, they're not up to snuff.
We don't like either of them.
Then you've got the fallout from Windrush, which Labour are pushing on very hard today, demanding that the government releases all of the documents pertaining to that. Of course, they're after the paper trail about the Prime Minister's involvement when she was Home Secretary.
Of creating the hostile environment?
Absolutely. We understand the Tories are going to push their MPs to vote against that. How does that look when the government normally says that it's committed to transparency? And the local elections tomorrow, where, as one senior Tory said to me, it's going to be a question of whether it's OK, bad, or very, very bad indeed.
This government has lived a hand-to-mouth existence since the election last year. It hasn't had a majority. It's divided on many things. It's now lost 9 amendments in the Lords. You do wonder if what is the argument over the customs union is probably the most serious problem Mrs May's had to deal with on Brexit yet. You also wonder, coming back to your NHS statement, can it survive another scandal?
Well, I think that's a very good question to ask. But what we have also seen is the polls, in as much as they are a true guide, but the polls actually being remarkably resilient.
Yes, I saw that the Tories were still 4 or 5 points ahead in the latest YouGov poll.
They are, and they are in a better position in terms of the polls than David Cameron's government was when these seats that are being contested in the local elections came up the last time round. I think that was in 2014. And you are not seeing what you might imagine traditionally to have been the case of the opposition party leaping, surging ahead in the polls.
You'd expect to be 15, 20 points ahead of them.
Given all of the problems that she has on her plate. And I think, you know, we're in this new, uncertain landscape where there are, you know, not just potholes, but giant craters all over the place. And we swing, therefore, from a climate when it seems that actually Theresa May is, you know, oh, she's starting to do better, she's looking stronger again. And then suddenly it feels a day like today where, goodness me, things are very, very wobbly indeed. And I think we are in a situation where instability is sort of baked into the system because she doesn't have a majority and the mistake of calling the election was hers. Put on top of that, you have a very divided Tory party rather than a party that's willing always to swing behind her. And you have a situation that is extremely febrile. But I've had the conversation with Tories before when they said, well, she couldn't survive another ...
And she has. Resilience
so,
has been a feature
absolutely,
too. Let's go and join the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition with Prime Minister's questions.
Join me in offering our deepest condolences to the family and friends of Michael Martin, latterly Lord Martin of Springburn, who died earlier this week. He served as Speaker for nearly 9 years, and I'm sure members will remember his sense of public service, his commitment to his constituency in Glasgow, and his good humour. And I particularly remember him for the courtesy which he always showed me. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Upskirting is the vile practice of taking a photo under a woman's skirt without her consent. This is neither a specific nor sexual offence under the current law in England and Wales. I've been working closely with Gina Martin, who's been campaigning to change this for months, and her lawyer, to produce a private member's bill to make upskirting a specific crime under the Sexual Offences Act 2003. Both of us has joined us here today. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Prime Minister, does she agree with us that the law in England and Wales should be reformed so that in all circumstances women like Gina and indeed the Honourable Lady herself will be protected from upskirt images being taken without consent?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all say to the Honourable Lady that I share the outrage at this intrusive behaviour that she has referred to and the distress that it can cause to victims. We're determined to ensure that victims do have confidence that their complaints will be taken seriously. It is possible currently to bring prosecutions, but my right honourable friend, the Justice Secretary, is examining the state of the law at the moment to make sure that it is fit for purpose, and as part of that work, he is considering her bill in detail.
Raymond Chishti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Medway has recently been shortlisted to receive £170 million from the government's Housing Infrastructure Fund, which will help build and support 12,000 houses locally, having also benefited from the £6 billion government Lower Thames crossing. Can the Prime Minister confirm that this demonstrates the government's commitment to supporting local communities?
To my honourable friend that we do absolutely share his concern about ensuring that we are supporting local communities and that we're delivering better infrastructure in those communities and maximising the potential of our country. And the Housing Infrastructure Fund is an important part of that. We need to build more homes across this country, but we also need to ensure the infrastructure is there to support those homes and help those local communities. That's exactly what we're doing.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Michael Martin, former Labour MP for Glasgow Springburn and later Speaker of the House. He worked in the engineering industry in Glasgow. He was active in the then AUEW, and he and I first met when we were fellow organisers in the National Union of Public Employees in the 1970s, campaigning for decent public sector pay and a national minimum wage. Michael loved the community he represented, loved his family, and our deepest thoughts and sympathies go to him and his family at this present time. Mr. Speaker, did the Prime Minister feel the slightest pang of guilt when the Home Secretary was forced to resign due to the failures of her predecessor?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that I think it might be helpful if I first update the House on the actions the government has taken and is continuing to take in relation to the Windrush, in relation to the Windrush generation, because my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will be addressing the House on this later today. We all share the ambition to make sure we do right by members of the Windrush generation, and that's why he will be announcing a package of measures to bring transparency on the issue, to make sure that the House is informed, to reassure members of this House, but more importantly, to reassure those people who have been directly affected. Speed is of the essence, and my right honourable friend will be commissioning a full review of lessons learned, independent oversight and external challenge, with the intention of reporting back to this House before we rise for the summer. And the review will have full access to all relevant information in the Home Office, including policy papers and casework decisions.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, this was a crisis made in the Home Office by successive Home Secretaries. And only a week ago today, the member for Hastings and Rye, then Home Secretary, was denying there were any targets in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee. On Monday, the Prime Minister told the media, when I was Home Secretary, yes, there were targets. One wonders why the Prime Minister didn't tell her Home Secretary about that. And the pain that's been caused to the Windrush generation needs to be resolved very rapidly and full compensation paid as quickly as it can be possibly done, and an understanding of the hurt that they feel. But this isn't the only failure of this government or the only failure of its policies. The government used to talk about a long-term economic plan. But now, Mr. Speaker, we're the slowest growing economy in the G7. The Chancellor, sitting 2 places along from her, told the House his view was positively tiggerish of the British economy, yet it has the worst economic growth figures for 5 years. What plans does the government have to change course to ensure we do get economic growth?
First of all, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, on the Windrush generation, I was Home Secretary when some of these decisions were taken and mistakes were made about individual cases, and I've apologised for that. The former Home Secretary also apologised for that. The right honourable gentleman is right in saying these are decisions that have been taken under successive Home Secretaries, including under the last Labour government. And if he wants to talk about the economy, let's just see what we've seen in our economy in recent weeks. Day-to-day spending in surplus for the first time in 16 years. The lowest net borrowing in over a decade. Exports of goods and services at a record high. Employment at a record high, and real wages up. That's a Conservative government delivering an economy fit for the future.
Mr. Speaker, 4 facts about the economy. Mr. Speaker, more people in debt, more people using food banks, more people sleeping on our streets, and more children in poverty. And the consequences of decisions made by the Chancellor of the Exchequer are that the NHS is suffering the longest funding squeeze in history. It sent our health service into an all-year-round crisis. Will the Prime Minister apologise to NHS patients waiting longer than ever for the worst A&E waiting times on record?
I gave the right honourable gentleman some facts about the economy. I can give him some others. More people in work, and actually fewer children in absolute poverty under this government. And when it comes to the National Health Service, since November, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, has announced £10 billion extra for the National Health Service. But I have also said that we want to ensure that the National Health Service is able to operate on a long-term plan. That's why we are conducting a review to produce that long-term plan with sustainable multi-year funding. That's the sensible approach to take. Not just to say this is all about money, but to say how can we ensure that the NHS is the NHS that will deliver for people in the future. That's about funding. It's also about reforming the NHS to make sure patients get the right treatment.
Mr. Speaker, not only was March the worst month on record in A&E departments, it was also the worst month for cancelled operations. There are 100,000 vacancies for NHS staff, and the Prime Minister personally intervened to overrule the Health Secretary and the Home Secretary when they asked for a relaxation of visa rules in order to recruit staff to work in our NHS. But it's not just the NHS where the government is damaging our public services. In January, the Education Secretary promised that no school would see a cut in its funding. Last week, he was invited to repeat that pledge and refused. I wonder why. Will the Prime Minister now tell parents, teachers and students the truth, that the school's budget is in fact being cut in real terms all over the country?
No, the Right Honourable Gentleman is wrong. What we are doing is ensuring that there is more money available to schools. We are ensuring that we are protecting that core budget because we want to ensure that every child, regardless of the background, gets the education that they need and the education that fulfills their potential. And that's why, once again, it's not just a question of the money you put in, it's about how you spend the money you are spending. And that's why I'm pleased to say that 1.9 million more children are in good or outstanding schools under this government, and education standards are going up under this government. That's more opportunities for our young people.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, it is quite astonishing that the Education Secretary has been corrected by the UK Statistics Authority. The IFS says that schools' budgets are being cut, and the Prime Minister still appears to be in denial. It's not just in NHS and education where this government is damaging our public services. Mr. Speaker, it is also about police budgets. The previous Home Secretary claimed there was no link between police numbers and serious violent crime, yet Home Office civil servants said there is a link. Who does the Prime Minister think is right?
Well, can I say, first of all, on the issue of crime and police budgets, of course, we are making available this year £450 million more for police forces across the country. We have been protecting police budgets, which is in direct contrast to what was suggested to me I should do by the former Shadow Home Secretary, the former Labour member, now the Mayor for Manchester, when he suggested 5 to 10% cuts could be given in police budgets. But can I also say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that he talks about the issue of numbers and the relationship between police numbers and crime. His own shadow police minister has said in terms that there isn't that relationship between police funding and the number of crimes that take place. Once again, it's how we ensure we're dealing with these issues. It's ensuring that the police are able to deal with the challenges and crimes of today, and that's what we're doing with our serious violence strategy, with our National Crime Agency, taking action across the board to ensure that our police are able to keep people safe.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, our Shadow Police Minister was pointing out that there's been a £2.3 billion cut in police budgets in the last Parliament, and it's her government that is underfunding our police force. 21,000 police officers have lost their jobs since 2010. 6,700 police and community support officers lost their jobs. In the meantime, violent crime is rising, and sadly, there are deaths from knife crime on the streets of most cities, particularly in London. Mr. Speaker, the economy is slowing, homelessness is rising, more children are living in poverty, the Home Office in chaos, and the government making a complete shambles of the Brexit negotiations. They're damaging our NHS, damaging our children's schools, cutting police as crime scores. And, Mr. Speaker, they claim to be strong and stable. with council tax rising by more than 5% all over the country, isn't the truth. The truth, Mr. Speaker, facing voters tomorrow is that with the Tories, you pay more and you get less.
More funding going into the NHS, more funding going into our schools, more funding going into social care. But if he wants to talk about council tax and the impact of council tax on local residents, well, I suggest he goes to Hazelbourne Road in Clapham. On one side of the road, in a typical home, someone will pay nearly £1,400 in council tax. Now, that, of course, is in Labour-run Lambeth. On the other side of the road, someone in a typical home will pay just over £700 in council tax. That's in Conservative-run Wandsworth. No clearer example can there be that Conservative councils cost you less.
Mr. Peter Boone!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 331 days, 11 hours, 40 minutes and 22 seconds, the Prime Minister will be leading us out of the European Union. She will end the free movement of the people. We will stop sending billions of pounds each and every year to the EU. And we'll make our own laws in our own country, judged by our own judges. My question to the Prime Minister is, in 332 days' time, will she come to Wellingborough, where she will be carried shoulder high through the streets to the echoing of cheering crowds, and I will be able to show her the site where a statue to the Brexit Queen will be erected?
Can I say to... I'm tempted.
Order. I don't think we were in any danger of not hearing the question. But we must hear the answer. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend's absolutely right. We will be leaving the European Union, and I'm tempted to say to his request, how can I refuse?
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A young mother in Coatbridge, a grandmother who has lived here for 50 years, a former cook in this Parliament. Just 3 examples of people who have been wrongly told to leave the United Kingdom. Then there are numerous people wrongly detained or deported, lives turned upside down, irreparable damage to families. The Prime Minister, on the 22nd of October 2013, in this chamber said, "Deport first and hear appeals later." Will she now withdraw these remarks?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he was referring to changes in legislation that were put through in the Immigration Act that followed that particular debate. But can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he's right that, and I've apologised for not just the anxiety that has been caused to people in the Windrush generation, but for those who have found themselves with decisions being taken about their situation here which were wrong, because the Windrush generation are British and they are part of us. That is why my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is making sure that the task force that has been put in place, the team that's been put in place, is dealing with cases expeditiously and is giving people the reassurance about their status here. But I also say to the right honourable gentleman that we do need to ensure that we are a welcoming country for people who want to come here and contribute, but that we also take action against those who are illegally here, who break the rules and who try to play the system.
Ian Blackford.
Well, interestingly, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister failed to remove these insulting remarks. And let me say, it's easy to change your Secretary of State. She does it frequently. You need to change your policies. Currently, there are an estimated 120,000 undocumented children who are entitled by law to the UK citizenship, but only if they register at a cost of £1,000. A new Windrush generation who will be unable to secure jobs and rent properties. These children, entitled to citizenship, they should not be charged to exercise their rights. How can she possibly justify these policies?
To the right honourable gentleman, I think what members of the public want to ensure is that we have a fair immigration system, that we have rules, that people abide by those rules, and that's why we make a very clear distinction between people who have come here. I want people who come here legally, who do the right thing, who contribute to our society, to be able to feel this is a welcoming country and one of the most welcoming countries in the world. On the other side, we also need to make sure that we have a system that deals with those who break the rules, who play the system and who try to jump ahead of others, and that's what people will expect for us. They want us to have a system which is fair and a system which sets out rules and ensure that people are abiding by them.
Mrs. Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Carver Barracks in my constituency of Saffron Walden is home to the Royal Engineers Bomb Disposal Unit, who carry out life-saving but very dangerous work on all our behalves. Can the Prime Minister tell the House what the government's veteran strategy is and how it will help soldiers such as those at Carver Barracks in their transition to civilian life?
Can I say to my honourable friend, we very much value the work that is done by the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit of 33 and 101 Engineer Regiments. It is this veteran strategy, which was recently launched by my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, is a groundbreaking strategy. There will be a government task force from across the whole of Whitehall, from across departments, and it will be focusing on exactly the sort of issues she's made, which is assessing how we can help veterans meet the financial demands of civilian life, crucially ensuring that mental and physical well-being is maximised, and offering the best possible advice to veterans on housing. I think these are the key issues for those veterans, and it's exactly what we'll be focusing on in this veteran strategy.
Martin Doherty-Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Evidence of the inhumane and cruel impact of the government's flagship universal credit policy is clear for all to see. Its impact has been devastating, and the Prime Minister can no longer bury their head in the sand as they have done with the Windrush scandal. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister get a grip, take action to protect families from being forced further into crisis, or does the Prime Minister simply believe that the damage being done to the poorest and most vulnerable in our communities is a price worth paying?
I say to the honourable gentleman, we have been rolling out universal credit. We have been doing it at a pace which ensures we have been able to hear from those who've been affected by it and to make changes. And changes have been made in the way that universal credit is introduced in this country. We have ensured that we've reduced that, taken out that 7 days of waiting time, for example. But what lies behind universal credit is the belief that actually the important thing for families to help sustain them is to get people into work. The evidence of universal credit is it is doing just that. It is helping people into work. And I would have thought the honourable gentleman should welcome a policy that helps people to get into the workplace.
John Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple of weeks ago, the Prime Minister indicated that she was minded to visit my constituency of Carlisle. Yes. I'm delighted to inform the Prime Minister that from the 4th of June, she will be able to fly into Carlisle on a commercial flight for the first time in 30 years. She will arrive in the city which is at the centre of the United Kingdom, and a city recently described as the beating heart of the Borderlands region. But if Carlisle and the Borderlands are to succeed, thrive and grow, we need government support. Can the Prime Minister confirm that she will give the Borderlands such support?
Well, can I first of all join my honourable friend in welcoming the return of commercial flights to Carlisle Airport. This will allow more people to access the Borderlands region. But can I also, he talks about support for the Borderlands. Of course, the Borderlands growth deal, which my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, committed to, is an important part of that. And I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend on his recent appointment as Borderlands growth deal champion. I'm sure he will be doing all he can to ensure that that government support is there and that the Borderlands continue to thrive.
Howell Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said many, many times that she'll have no hard border between Dublin and Belfast. Can she tell this House just once what sort of a border she'd like to see between Dublin and Holyhead?
say to the honourable gentleman that we have been very clear that we will not see a border down the Irish Sea. We have been clear about that in the joint report that was issued between us and the European Commission and adopted by the European Council in December. And when the European Commission made a proposal for dealing with the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, which would have meant a border down the Irish Sea, I was clear that neither I nor any British Prime Minister could accept that.
Matt Warman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With a rising budget and a new medical school for Lincolnshire, this government has very clearly demonstrated its commitment to the NHS in Boston and Skegness. But there are short-term challenges recruiting paediatric staff to the paediatric ward. Can my right honourable friend reassure my constituents and parents in my constituency that the decision to make a temporary closure has not yet been made, and that she will work with me to leave no stone unturned so the Trust, NHS England and NHS Improvement can work together to make sure that we recruit the doctors we need and this government is investing in?
Can I give my honourable friend the reassurance that he is asking for? He's right that we're supporting the NHS in Boston and Skegness. Any decision taken by the Trust about the services available will of course be made to ensure that the provision of services is safe for patients. The Trust is continuing to try and recruit paediatricians to support the service. It wants to continue to provide paediatric services at Boston, and every effort will be made to ensure that that can continue.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Windrush scandal is not a mistake, nor is it an aberration. It is the direct result of the Prime Minister's policies. Unobtainable net migration targets and the hostile environment are the Prime Minister's policies. So will she take this opportunity to make a public apology to people who have been... Will she make a public apology to people... Will she make a public apology for her policies?
Can I say to the honourable lady that she might have listened to the answer that I gave earlier in Prime Minister's questions. She might also have listened. She might also have listened to the answers that I gave last week, and I was very clear in my apology to those of the Windrush generation who have been caught up in this issue. She talks about what has happened here. What has happened here is that people who are here legally, who are British, have found themselves caught up in this, and as I've said, I apologise for that. What has also happened is that over the years, governments of both Labour, Coalition and Conservative governments have successively been taking action to deal with illegal immigrants, which is a different issue. This is an issue that has been dealt with by governments of all colours.
Amber Rudd.
Could I take the opportunity to congratulate my right honourable friend for Bromsgrove on his appointment to such an important department, not only in terms of security, but also in terms of ensuring we have a safe and fair immigration policy. Could I add, Mr. Speaker, that the UK threat level remains at severe. Last year, we had 5 terrorist attacks that got through and 36 innocent people that were killed. Could I invite the Prime Minister to share with me our admiration for the extraordinary work and bravery that is done by our counter-terrorism for policing, our emergency services and our security services, which I know we are all grateful for.
Can I first of all say to my right honourable friend that I'm pleased to be able to have this opportunity to pay tribute to her and the work that she did as Home Secretary. She did valuable work across all elements of the Home Office, including issues like modern slavery and domestic violence. The work my right honourable friend did with the internet companies in terms of keeping people safe on the internet was groundbreaking. And can I also share with her the support and admiration for the work that all in our emergency services, in our police, in our counter-terrorism police and in our security and intelligence agencies do, for all that they do to keep us safe. And also commend her for the work that she did following the terrorist attacks last year to set in train action to ensure that we continue to make sure that those services get the support they need to be able to continue to keep us safe.
Yeah. Joe Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's new Home Secretary says that her hostile environment, and I quote, does not represent our values as a country. Does she agree with him?
No, what my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, said was that he absolutely shares the need to differentiate between legal and illegal immigrants. What he also said was that there was a certain phrase that he wasn't going to use, a phrase that was first used by Labour ministers in government. Across government, we are clear that we are working hard to support and to help those of the Windrush generation who have been caught up in this issue recently across time, but also that we're ensuring that we do have a fair immigration policy that does ensure that those people who break the rules, who play the system, who try to jump ahead of others, are not able to carry on being here in this country in the same way as those who play by the rules and who are hard-working taxpayers and contribute to our society. And that's only fair.
Helen Grant.
Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's only under the Conservatives that you get decision and that you get vision? And that's why Maidstone Borough Council needs to turn blue on the 3rd of May.
Can I say to my honourable friend that she is absolutely right. If you look up and down the country, and those who are taking part in council elections tomorrow, who are making those decisions, they will see that up and down the country it's Conservative councils that support local communities, provide good local services and keep council tax low. And the message is very clear. If that's what you want, vote Conservative tomorrow.
Ms. Karen Buck.
Mr. Speaker, ministers will today discuss the two customs arrangement proposals first put forward last August. The first is untried and untested. The second relies on unproven technology. In any event, neither will be ready in time that they are needed, and both have been written off in Europe. Why, with just 6 months to go before a draft Brexit deal is signed off, are the government still considering options that we all know are not feasible?
Can I say to the honourable lady that we're very clear. We're going to leave the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. We will be leaving the customs union. We want to ensure that we can have an independent trade policy. We also want to ensure that we actually deliver. We're committed to delivering on our commitment of no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and ensuring we have as frictionless trade as possible with the European unions. There are a number of ways in which that can be delivered, and And if she's so interested in the whole question of customs border, she might like to ask her front bench to actually come to a decision on what the Labour Party policy is on this.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The European Scrutiny Committee, of which I have the honour to chair, has invited Mr. Ollie Robbins to appear before the committee on several occasions since February. So far, this has not been arranged. Would my right honourable friend be good enough to use her charm to ensure that Mr. Robbins does appear, as has already the Chancellor himself and the Secretary of State for Exiting the Union and Sir Tim Barrow?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, as he will know, that it isn't normally the case that any request to a civil servant to appear before a committee is automatically accepted. Decisions are taken about at what level civil servants should appear before committees. As he said, he's had a number of my right honourable friends appearing before his committee. I remember I'm not sure I can say fond memory the time before when I appeared before the European Scrutiny Committee when I was Home Secretary, but I will certainly look at the request that he's made.
Paula Sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The interim report of the Mental Health Act review stated that BAME men and women are more likely to come into contact with mental health services through the police, to be admitted to secure hospitals and to have poorer mental health outcomes over time. The Prime Minister has talked about ending the burning injustice of mental ill health. So why has her government still not appointed an equalities champion to tackle these inequalities nearly 2 years after it was recommended by the 5-year forward view for mental health?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that it is precisely to identify this sort of disparity in public services that I launched the race disparity audit when I became Prime Minister. Now, that does make, in some areas, that makes uncomfortable reading for our society, but it's absolutely right that we've done it, and it's absolutely right that we then address the issues that it has raised. But she talks about the issue of the interaction of people with mental health problems and the police. This isn't something that I waited to do something about until the race disparity audit. I did something about it when I was Home Secretary. We have significantly reduced the number of people with mental health problems who are being taken to a cell in a police station as a place of refuge. We have ensured that there is health support available for the police. As a result of that, those people who are in mental health crisis are getting better treatment than they did previously. There's more to do, but we've already started to take action.
Simon Hoare.
The hopes of the 464 survivors of thalidomide in the United Kingdom, the Thalidomide Trust and the all-party group which I chair, were significantly depressed at the weekend, seeing media coverage, particularly in the Sunday Times, suggesting that the German government is seeking to resile from its verbal pledge to make good the promise to compensate those UK survivors whose parents, whose mothers, took and were prescribed the German-manufactured drug thalidomide. Their lives are shortening and they need support. Will my right honourable friend use her good offices to augment the work of the Foreign Office to make the case for UK thalidomide survivors to the German government to finally get the justice that they have for too long been denied?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I fully recognise why those people who are the survivors of thalidomide were so concerned at the reports that they saw, because, of course, although back in 2012 the Department of Health here has announced an £80 million grant for thalidomide survivors, of course they have been able and are able to apply to the German Kontergan Foundation for Disabled Persons for funds. In relation to the particular point he's raised, I know that my right honourable friend, the Minister for Europe, has met representatives of the Thalidomide Trust towards the end of last year to discuss this, and the FCO is remaining in contact with the Trust, and the FCO is pursuing their discussions with the German government on this point.
Helen Jones.
When one of my constituents had a heart attack, he waited 1 hour and 20 minutes for a paramedic and 2 hours for an ambulance because they were having to queue up at local hospitals. He never made it back home. Faced with such a human tragedy, does the Prime Minister feel any pang of conscience for the shambles she has created in our NHS?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that she sets out what is obviously a very sad and tragic case in relation to her constituent. I'm happy to look at the issues, at the background of what led to that particular outcome being the result. We all want to make sure that patients are able to be treated in the NHS when they need that treatment and get the appropriate treatment. That's why we have been putting that extra money into the NHS. But as I say, it's a very sad case that she's outlined, and I'm happy to look at the details of it.
Cheryl Gillen.
Mr. Speaker, as voters go to the polls tomorrow, could the Prime Minister confirm that a green future is at the heart of our local government policies? And would she agree to meet with me and others to look at our aspiration for the Chilterns area of outstanding natural beauty to become a national park, so we can increase the opportunities afforded for open-air recreation on London's doorstep?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend that we are protecting our natural environment and we want to leave a cleaner, greener Britain for our children, and that's not just something that Conservatives in national government want to do, it's what Conservatives at local government want to do as well. That's why we've launched our 25-year environment plan. I know the beauty of the Chilterns, I enjoy working in the Chilterns, and I'm happy to meet my right honourable friend and others to discuss her proposal.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister confirm that every UK government department has budgeted for a derisory 1% pay rise for all of its civil servants? Is it fair that workers who collect tax, try to make a broken social security system work, and a broken immigration system work are getting a real terms pay cut and still subjected to a public sector pay cap.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that, as he knows, we have been very clear that in terms of the 1% cap that has taken place over recent years on the public sector pay, we have been clear that that blanket cap is not an approach that we are taking in the future. Obviously, departments are funded at a certain level, and it's for departments then to come forward with their proposals in relation to pay within their department.
Jones.
Today, council tax on average cost less in real terms than it did in 2010. Under 13 years of Labouring government, council tax doubled. Will my right honourable friend confirm that the council tax referendum principles that this government's put in place have been a resounding success?
Can I say to my honourable friend, he is absolutely right about the facts that he has set out in relation to council tax. That's a result of decisions that have been taken by the government to have that council tax referendum in place, and decisions where we see Conservative councils actually making decisions to freeze or to lower council tax or to ensure that it is kept lower than the Labour councils. Conservative councils, on average, cost a typical family £100 less in council tax than councils run by other parties. That's important, and the government has played its part with the council tax referendum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since being first elected in 2015, I have consistently campaigned to protect hundreds of jobs at risk in Dundee from being lost through HMRC's shoddy restructuring. I was finally given a written guarantee that these jobs would be transferred to the DWP. However, I've since learnt, without explanation, that this is no longer to be the case. So will the Prime Minister personally intervene to reverse this reckless U-turn and betrayal by taking charge to save each and every one of the 479 highly skilled jobs, without which will leave a devastating impact on the staff, their families and my city?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that he's raised an issue. I have not seen the details of that issue, but I will ensure that my right honourable friends, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, look at the issue he's raised.
Nicky Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This afternoon, the Treasury Select Committee will take evidence from TSB about the recent IT failures which have left thousands of customers unable to access their accounts, unable to pay their bills, and with some very severe consequences. Does my right honourable friend agree that a robust and reliable banking IT infrastructure is essential in the modern economy? It's unfair to businesses who can't pay their takings, it's unfair to vulnerable customers, and it's particularly unfair when many banks are still closing branches.
Can I say to my right honourable friend that I agree that obviously in today's world of modern banking, a robust and safe and reliable IT system is an essential underpinning of that modern banking. And I'm sure that my right honourable friend and the Treasury Select Committee will be ensuring that they get to the bottom of what has happened in TSB in the evidence that they take.
Gloria De Piero.
Mr. Speaker, last Saturday night, an 83-year-old woman had a fall at home and was bleeding from a head wound. She waited for an ambulance for nearly 3 hours. Will the Prime Minister apologise to my constituent and promise the rest of the country that no one else's elderly mum will suffer like this?
Can I say to the honourable lady that if she would like to give details, more expansive details of the case, then I know that the Secretary of State will look very closely into the case that she's identified. I'm sorry to hear of the circumstances of her constituent, but we will look into the case.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night at 9:08 p.m, 2 men were shot outside Queensbury Station on the edge of my constituency. One is dead, the other in a critical condition. Queensbury Station is an important transport hub for the people of Harrow East and also the people of Brent North. Will my right honourable friend join with me in thanking the police for their prompt action in securing the area, and equally the messages of reassurance they're giving to the community today? Will she also take every necessary step to remove guns and knives from society to prevent reoccurrence?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I recognise the importance that's attached to Queensberry Station. Can I also say I join him in commending the action of police and emergency services in response to these and other such incidents. He's right in the importance of dealing with offensive weapons. That's why we've announced plans, under my right honourable friend, the previous Home Secretary, being taken forward by the current Home Secretary to introduce an offensive weapons bill. It's why we have launched a serious violence strategy and the Serious Violence Task Force, which actually brings together ministers and representatives from across this House, together with police and others, to deal with this issue, met for the first time, and it will continue to meet as it continues to address this important issue.
Thank you. Order.
Prime Minister's questions comes to an end there. We're going to get a statement from the Health Secretary, I think following quite hard on that. As Laura was saying, it's about breast screening. I'm going to come to Laura in a second. Just to do the PMQs, Mr Corbyn began with a rather good question, was to whether the Prime Minister had any guilt over Amber Rudd's resignation. And then we went into local election mode, which of course taking place tomorrow. The Leader of the Opposition going in first of all on the economy, why was growth so slow, then moving on to poverty, to underfunding, as he sees it, of the NHS, cancelled operations and the vacancies there, then police budgets and, of course, school budgets as well. All the issues that he will think will be uppermost in people's minds when they go to the polls this morning. The Prime Minister replied in kind, but it was basically the Leader of the Opposition says, here's one set of statistics that shows you're useless. And the Prime Minister replies, we're giving a completely separate set of statistics which says I'm not really useless at all. So there you go. Let's go straight to Laura. You were right. It's about breast screening. There's been a major problem. People have not been sent letters to tell them to go for breast screening. Tell us what's happening.
This is a huge issue. It's emerging that nearly 500,000 women were not invited to a breast screening appointment that they should have been offered by the NHS. It appears that there was some fault with an algorithm, basically an IT fault in the NHS computers at some point between 2006 and 2009. As a result of that, women between the ages of 50 and 70 who are entitled to have a screening for breast cancer every 3 years were not sent an invitation. Some of them have now died through old age, but of course it also is a possibility that some of those who should have had a screening, who didn't, may have gone on to
because they didn't get the screening.
Because they didn't get the screening invitation. So this seems to be a very major problem for the NHS. I would imagine also that within hours, or certainly within days, I would have thought that the government will of course be looking into some kind of inquiry to exactly what went wrong.
And the IT problem began under the last Labour government, yes, but it seems to have been only in January of this year, yes, that they discovered that there had been a problem. So I mean, we're talking 8-9 years.
Potentially this mistake has had an impact over nearly a decade. As you suggest, it came to light during an IT upgrade to the system. So it's something that wasn't just a problem, but a problem that went undetected for a very long time, hence why it seems so many people have been caught up in this. Right. But a health scandal, I suppose, that affects nearly as many as 500,000 people, and clearly many people will be very worried by this. So the Health Secretary will be trying to give answers, but whether the government has very many answers on this, hard to know.
Well, it's 10 minutes to 1. The Health Secretary is making a statement to the House of Commons. If we can, we'll bring you a clip of what he's saying before we go off air at 1 o'clock. Let's go back to Prime Minister's questions, discuss what was happening with the Housing Minister, Dominic Raab, and the Shadow Home Office Minister, Nick Thomas-Symonds. And of course, Laura is still with us. Dominic Raab, the Prime Minister, as part of her list of things that were going well with the economy, she said real wages are up. Explain that.
Well, because inflation is now coming down. Remember, the forecasters suggested it would hit 4%. It's come down from its peak at 3%, and it's now, is it 2.5 or 2.7%? I think it's down at 2.5%. And the Bank of England have said we'll see real wages rising this year.
But they're not up yet, are they?
I think they are on the monthly data, but
on 1 month.
I'd have to check. But that's a really key tipping point, because actually, in terms of the feel-good factor in the economy, people are starting to see that some of those cost of living pressures change.
It might be a tipping point. But inflation is still about 2.5%, and wages are rising about 2.5%, so it's pretty nip and tuck. Whereas we do know from the figures that real wages are still below where they were in 2007, which is, what, 11 years ago now. So real wages are still below where they were over a decade ago. You can hardly boast that they're up.
Well, hold on a sec, because actually real wages were rising until September 2016, and then we had this limbo period where they were stagnant. I accept that, but that's
well, they were falling.
I think you'd expect a Prime Minister to point out, actually we've turned the corner on that. You're starting to see some of the feel-good factor come into the economy. It's not just the record in employment on jobs, 3 million since 2010, 3/4 of them full-time, but actually wages are going up as well, and that's a good thing. It'd be shocking if the Prime Minister hadn't come back with that.
The Leader of the Opposition raised the matter of economic growth. In 2014, the economy grew by 3.3%. In 2015, 2.1%. 2016, 2%. 2017, 1.4%. And in the past year to Q1, 1.2%. So it's fallen by a third. A third. It's gone down. It's a third, not fallen by. It's a third of what it was 4 years ago. Why has economic growth collapsed under this government?
Oh, hold on a minute here. So first of all, of course, the economic cycle goes through downturns and upturns, but we haven't had the recession that many predicted if we voted to leave the EU.
That wasn't my question.
No, I know. But my point was, you do have, we're at that stage of the economic cycle. A few years ago, you're right, we were comparing ourselves with the EU and the other G7 economies. So, but the fact of the matter is, we still have resilient growth. I think a lot of the...
you don't. Your annual growth rate at the moment is 1.2%. In Q1, it grew by 0.1%. And by the way, the global economy is growing, the Eurozone is growing, America is growing, the pound is competitive, wages are still low, and yet growth has fallen by 66% in 4 years.
And we did have a bad Q1 growth, but many of the forecasters at the time said they expected it to be revised up. And if you look at the PMI data on manufacturing, which came out yesterday, we've seen growth in manufacturing for 20 consecutive months.
Actually, the PMI on manufacturing is now, which is the main index, is now a 17-month low.
But it's been growing, it's expanding.
And it's now fallen again.
No, let's be clear about this, Andrew, because I looked at this yesterday. It's been expanding for 20 consecutive months. The rate may not be as high, sure, but actually the fundamentals of the economy, jobs, that manufacturing output is strong, and inflation coming down is what people will really feel.
Nick Thomas-Simmons, what do you make of the Prime Minister's figure? She takes this street where there's similar houses on both sides, and on the part in the Labour Council, the council tax is over £1,000, and on the Tory side, Wandsworth side, it's 700. Isn't that quite telling a day before the local elections?
It is telling that Labour councils are doing what they can to protect local services. And I mean, you'll appreciate, Andrew, I'm a Welsh Member of Parliament. I don't have local elections at the moment. But of course, my local council, as many others, take a balanced approach, and where there do have to be has to be money raised to save local services, they do so.
But that's a big gap between £700 in the Tory side and £1,100 on the Labour side. I mean, and we're talking. I mean, I think I know the street. It is contiguous between Lambeth and Wandsworth. These are not. I mean, they're nice, decent homes, but they're not. These are not wealthy people in that street.
Well, no, but that will be where the border lies between the two councils, obviously.
Exactly.
So that's where you can make the comparison. But the
so which side would you rather be on?
I'm making, Andrew. Well, hopefully, Andrew, we can be on either side and being a Labour council. But the point I would make to you, quite simply, is local services were the theme of Jeremy Corbyn's questions. The consequences of austerity over many years. If you want your local services protected, then the way to do that is to vote Labour tomorrow,
and
not
get an
Tory councils.
£1,100 council tax.
No, that's just a particular example and one contrast between two councils, Andrew.
Now, as we've been reporting, the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has been making a statement about a major NHS computer error. It led, as Laura has been saying, to hundreds of thousands of women in England. At the moment, we think it is England, but we'll need to check that if the rest of the UK is affected. It resulted in them missing routine breast cancer screening. This is what Mr Hunt has just told the Commons.
There was a computer algorithm failure dating back to 2009. The latest estimates I've received from PHE is that as a result of this, between 2009 and the start of 2018, an estimated 450,000 women aged between 68 and 71 were not invited to their final breast screening. At this stage, it is unclear whether any delay in diagnosis will have resulted in any avoidable harm or death. And that is one of the reasons I'm ordering an independent review to establish the clinical impact. Our current best estimate, which comes with caveats as it's based on statistical modelling rather than patient reviews, and because there is currently no clinical consensus about the benefits of screening for this age group, is that there may be between 135 and 270 women who had their lives shortened as a result.
The Health Secretary speaking to the Commons just a few minutes ago, and Laura, I guess that last figure he gave there is based on computer modelling. He's clearly a bit tentative, but it suggests the human cost of this IT failure.
It does, and it suggests that there will be now families around the country who will hear this news today and wonder whether or not an NHS mistake contributed somehow to losing their relative earlier.
Up to 270, I think he said, is that right?
Up to 270. Now, he stressed, as you did then, it's very difficult to know. This is based on...
They're not counting the numbers.
Absolutely. This is based on estimates from the NHS looking at what they would expect to happen to this kind of group of women in that stage, women between the ages of 68 and 71, who should have been invited in for a final breast cancer screening session and were not. But although this is an estimate, clearly this is a very serious situation for the NHS, a very serious thing for the government to be able to account for, and clearly has been going on for a long time. This mistake began at some point between 2006 and 2009 and was undetected for nearly a decade.
Okay, Laura, thanks. And there'll be more on the Health Secretary's statement on this breast screening revelation on BBC News throughout the day.
That's all, folks. I've been